Welcome back to the Street Theology podcast, where we bring current events and theological concepts down to a street level. This episode of Street Theology is a recording of a mental health panel that took place during our college outreach service, Mondays at TBE. We hope you enjoy this episode. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to these three lovely humans up here. First, we'll start with Trey. We call him Treezy, or Treyzoda.
The resident white guy on our staff.
Yes, and we were going through bios today, and he said, please introduce me as the moderately self-aware, more self-aware human than the other people on this staff. But
that was incorrect.
Oh, okay.
I said to introduce me as the only reason that I have to be on this panel is that if a 50 is the average self-awareness of a person, I'm like at a 51.
Okay,
so,
there you go.
only one step ahead. That's all you guys need to be up here.
Really? Word?
No. The real truth is that he actually studied psychology, studied sports psychology. His father is the Dr. Mike Zoda, and so he's worked closely with one of the best therapists in the country. We've also got the one and only Pastor Adrian Crawford. He's pastor of Engaged Church. Owned and bought and sold several companies. Not bought, but sold several companies. And he's done his own journey with mental health and has really walked the walk over the years. And we're really excited for his insight here as well. And then our special guest of the evening, we have Lindsay Kemp. We're very excited to have her here. She has been practicing as a licensed mental health therapist for 12 years. She's got a specialty in ADHD, family systems, and trauma, complex trauma. So we're really excited.
Wow, so I
that
can get
she's
free
here.
therapy tonight. Great.
Right. So all of the trauma questions will be directed to you. So we're really excited to have them all here today. We've got a ton of questions, so we'll work through as many as we can. But just to kick off the night, I would love for each of you to share in 60 seconds or less, why does this matter to you? Mental health and spirituality, why is it important to you guys?
Okay, I'll start. Well, obviously it matters to me because I'm a therapist, so I value mental health. I know for my own life, it was changed when I started going to see a therapist about college because, mental health, physical health, it's all connected, as well as just finding a purpose and sense of self. You have to really kind of push through the mental health things that are going on in your life. So I think it's valuable because it makes us better people.
I think for me, it's just my own journey. I didn't... it wasn't something talked about a ton growing up and struggled with it. Didn't realize anything about EQ or emotionality or things like that. And it took me about 10 some odd years ago sitting in his father's office that actually the thing that I thought was my biggest flaw, which was my emotionality, actually was my superpower. And so actually walking through a process of seeing that unlocked and seeing what it's actually allowed me to do. And so I'm really passionate about actually helping people get better because, as Lindsay said, it makes them better human beings, and actually it helps them I think go after their meaningful work, helps them in their marriage, and on and on. So.
That's good.
Yeah, mine's kind of the opposite of Pastor Adrian's. So it's just been the water that I've lived in my entire life, just hearing from my dad. And one of the things, to bring the faith aspect of it into it, is that life is just about relationships. It's about relationships with each other. It's about a relationship with God. Having mental health helps that, right? So the more aware we are, the more aware we become of how we feel, the more aware we become of God's presence, and all of that ultimately helps us just to have healthy relationships with the Savior and with each other.
That's great. So going off from that, can you give us big picture, what does it look like to actually be emotionally, mentally healthy? What are some beginner steps on how we get there?
Well, I think the first step is having self-awareness, being able to actually voice how you feel and then why you feel that way. And then from there, I would say that it's all about what do you do with that? Once you know those things, how do you process it, right? So what is the way that you communicate that with another individual and also with Jesus? So where are you? Where's Jesus? Again, you will probably hear multiple times tonight, this all comes back to Genesis. You hear Pastor Adrian say it all the time, but literally Genesis chapter 3, God's asking where you are, and it comes back to just continuing to tell him, here's where I'm at, this is what's going on, here's how I feel.
That's good. Anything to add? Good with that? Okay. So we've got the holidays approaching. which is a good time for some people and a not so great time for other people. A reoccurring theme in the puzzle pieces and in some of the questions we got had a lot to do with family. So if your family is your biggest pain point, if they're hard to communicate with, if you're trying to figure out what healthy boundaries look like, how do we approach that, especially with the holidays coming? Anybody can take it.
That is a really big question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go off the boundaries part because
Okay.
I am a big fan of boundaries. I've set a lot of them in my life, especially with family. So I think it's important. Boundaries are like a fence to protect yourself. So you can't come in my yard or like for my dog. My dog loves to run out of the yard. So boundaries are more of something like a protection. So it's going to be more of the, you cannot do this to me because this hurts me. And because this hurts me, this hurts our relationship. So I would say boundaries are exceptionally important, but also be prepared because people don't like when you set boundaries with them. So they're going to become angry, they're going to push back. But again, this is for kind of the greater good, is to really kind of set this, I'm not going to go here, we're not going to talk about this, you're not going to bring this subject up. Because that's kind of it's one of the best ways to get through the holidays is just being able to protect yourself so that you can have quality time with your family, not necessarily just quantity or ones that make you stressed out. So,
Yeah, I would say this with boundaries. So I'm going to go the other way with this, and I agree. Is now with boundaries, I agree with boundaries, but actually you having boundaries and self-control. Because some of the stuff is that if you know Uncle Bob is there, and Uncle Bob is railing against critical race theory, and you have been waiting and loaded to argue with Uncle Bob during Thanksgiving, you actually have to know that putting boundaries to have self-control, not to get into arguments or conversations that you don't need to get into, or getting into conversations with your parents about whatever it may be. Sometimes it's okay not to feel like you have to always fight. And there's times where I'm going to family things or whatever. I'm like, I'm just making a decision. I'm not going to talk about this stuff. Because at the end of the day, I know they can't have it in a healthy way. And so sometimes I'm responsible. A lot of times I tell people, if you're the emotionally healthy one or more aware than the other people, then it's your responsibility to actually lead what those conversations actually look like. We're not talking about if they start pushing against you, but a lot of times we go in there and we just start looking to pick a fight with someone. And a lot of times what that does, then you walk away feeling like, well, I can't believe da-da-da, where it's like you should have never said anything in the first place. Just enjoy. Listen, eat the food. It's great. Okay, watch football. Like there's no need to argue. You know what I'm saying? Just enjoy your day. So,
yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is just thinking about whenever you put boundaries in place, right? Whether that's a family boundary or it's a boundary around a sin pattern or an addiction or something else, I would just always say go with the least restrictive boundary that you can handle. Right? So there's no need to jump into the deep end and to cut off a relationship with somebody because you have conflict about stuff. What is the least restrictive part that allows you to remain in a relationship or, to avoid doing that behavior or doing that sin pattern?
It's really good. Kind of going off of that, there were some questions about what is the appropriate amount of time to have distance from my family, or even should I take time away from school if I'm processing through emotional and mental health? How do you find that balance between this is a really hard, fast, immediate boundary, or I have room to kind of figure it out along the way?
I mean, we're going to start with you. Because
I love how you nod at me every question.
Every question.
Go
There we go. There we go. You got it.
So actually, I saw this question before we came in, of should I take a semester off of school? And I was really thinking about this a lot because I used to work at the counseling center at Florida State where we had this challenge a lot or had these questions a lot. And I think really, I don't know the situation, right? Sometimes you might need to take a semester off of school, but real life, you can't take a semester. I cannot take a semester off of my job. I could, but my husband may not like that very much because we can't pay our bills. So mental health it's not just a burst of I got to work on this and then kind of relax and let everything pile up again. It's something that you have to work on daily. It's exercise. So you can take a semester off of school, but it's not going to be great over on the long run because when you're 40 and you're stressed out, you can't take a semester off of your job. So
It's good. Thanks. Great.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Because I have to be careful right now because
Because you hate school?
No, it's not. No, it's not that with school. I just think that, like, all right, I'll say it. Like, as a guy who's had to walk through this, and I mean, again, really has walked through this idea with depression, suicide, all those things like that. The thing that I think is the problem nowadays is that when it comes to mental health, everyone actually shuts down, and that's not how you get better. Yeah. You do not get better by shutting down. It's like if somebody gets hurt and you tear your ACL, it's not your ACL gets better, you get it repaired. The way you get it back stronger is not just sitting at home and just sitting there. Mm-hmm. You actually have to go and rehab and feel the pain and then get on the court again. I mean, you have to do all the stuff that goes with it. And I think today what tends to happen, everyone just shuts down. And what we will continue, what used to be known as like stress, we will call it now, we'll put clinical terms around. Sometimes it's just stressful. And stress is a part of life. And so I will tell you, to actually get healthy, like as I was walking through my process of becoming healthy, I have 3 children. I was running a business. We were getting ready, we were starting a church. There was tons of pressure as I'm literally unearthing real deep stuff in my own soul. But that's what helped me get better, because as I walked through that process, I actually learned. I had to lean. Here's one thing. As a Jesus follower, I had to really lean on Jesus a ton, because it was over my head. I was out of my depth. I couldn't figure this out. So I had to constantly get before him as I worked through it, and it built something inside of me to go. And I want to encourage you that, again, that doesn't dismiss this. You got to be able to hold 2 ideas at once. You got to be able to say, no, this sucks and this is awful, but I've got to be tough enough to keep pushing forward. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I really like your point about stress because I do a lot of education with clients about anxiety, depression, and stress. Mm-hmm. And stress can mimic anxiety and depression, but it's also something you can control more because you can control the factors in your life that are causing stress. So I like that, because a lot of people come in and are like, I'm depressed or I'm anxious. And I'm like, no, you have a lot going on and you're just really, really stressed. Mm-hmm. So.
It's really good.
Can we hit a little bit more on misappropriation of therapeutic words real fast, in terms of saying stress for anxiety, sadness for depression, triggered by some fries that are cold? Like, how do we...
Like, I want to be really clever, and I'm being real serious on this one. Listen, because we deal with people, and I have people around me who have dealt with, like, huge amounts of, like, trauma. Mm. I cannot stand people using the word trauma. Yeah. Like, someone who is a rape victim, that is trauma. Your parents, like, maybe not loving you the way they should, is not trauma. It's not. The way that, like, because and what happens is that now we water down all these things. And I think it's a disservice to people who actually go through real trauma, because now everything's trauma. Well, somebody said this, or, like right now, well, my professor, they're causing trauma because of this. I'm like, no, he's not. And I think that's really important, because words mean something. And if we water down all the words, then what are we left with? And then what happens when someone really has real trauma, people dismiss them. That's why I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't like saying every situation is racist, because now the word gets watered down. When there's actually real racism that does take place, then we can't actually identify and go after it, because we say everything is. And so I think it's really important that we are very mindful of the type of words we use.
No, I mean, just to kind of connect those 2 points together and to go off what Pastor Adrian's saying here, I think that's really true. I think a part of becoming more mentally healthy is continuing to work through stuff as you're working, as you're in school, and being able to understand, is this traumatic, is this not traumatic, is a part of that. Because as you're working through these things and you're doing life, what you're doing is you're getting a toughness, which part of being mentally healthy is being mentally tough. The word might be resilience, or it might be something else, but it's the ability to, yeah, life happens, I'm feeling stuff, but I have to keep pushing, I have to keep moving forward. Like, ultimately being able to realize that you can handle it and that you can keep moving forward will only add to your capacity to handle heavier stuff in the future.
That's good. So for people who have experienced trauma or are dealing with real depression and anxiety and those kinds of things, if they've never talked about it before, or it's new to them, what are some tips on how they can begin talking about some of the things they're experiencing?
I think if you've been experienced trauma and it's new, you need to talk to a therapist. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times if once you start talking about trauma, or even once you go to therapy, it can get worse before it gets better. And so if you've experienced trauma, or if you are having suicidal thoughts or self-harm, and then you start to process your trauma in a way that isn't contained, then it can actually do a lot more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Literally, you can't even add anything else to that.
Yeah. No,
that's just
great.
free game. She just gave all y'all.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So we can go to the next question.
Yes.
There's nothing else to add to that.
So obviously, trauma is something we want to see our therapist for. For, I guess, day-to-day life, processing through things as we go, what is a good way to differentiate between I can only talk about this with my therapist, or I could probably process these things with my friends?
Okay, I'll do it again.
That's your guess.
One thing I really appreciate, when I was in college and I went to my counseling center, it was like down the dark hallway with the cobwebs, and you like just ignore the people that were walking down there. So I really appreciate that it's becoming more and more open and more acceptable to go see a therapist or to get on medication. I love that. Breakups can be talked to with a friend, and maybe not a therapist. Sometimes I talk with people about breakups, and that's completely fine. But I think we need to utilize our friends. We need to talk to our friends, not text, talk to our friends. Because so many people that I work with, I have to clarify, like, when you broke up with your boyfriend, was it over text? Like, did you actually have an interaction with this person? Because people just don't talk to each other anymore. We like to send pictures about our lives that seem perfect. But I think a lot of it is if we just talk to each other and share, a lot of us are going through very similar things. And your friends are going to be far more effective than me because you see me once a week for an hour, and you can see your friends anytime.
That's great. Other thoughts? Okay. So we had a couple questions here and then as well in our puzzle pieces regarding abuse and abusive relationships. So when it comes to getting out of them, healing from them, how do you look at doing healthy relationships in the future? Thoughts, ideas, input, wisdom.
Yeah, I think we should start. No, seriously, I think we should start though from a therapy standpoint versus then, because for me, what I like to try to do is then get to like actual practical parts of it. But because I don't want to start there. Someone's like, if they're in an abusive relationship, I think what are the first steps?
Well, I think when abusive relationships happen so often that they literally have made therapists a diagram for it. It's called the cycle of violence and control. So it's the honeymoon period of I love you, you're the best, and then the tension building phase. So you might know that your partner is getting angry, so you do everything you can to make them happy. And then there's the explosion phase, and then there's the honeymoon phase again. So it's this is the last time, I can't believe I did this, I was super tired, or and then it's this cycle. And so I show this to people because I'm like, you were stuck in this phase, and in the middle of that circle is denial, because that's what the person who's stuck in the relationship is they're living in denial, also stuck in this cycle. So did you want to, I don't want to talk the whole time.
No, it's really So the cycle. All right, so got it, cycle.
So I think, getting out of the cycle, you have to realize and acknowledge that this is what is going on. And then you have to cut it off completely, because the person will hook you back in with the, I'm so sorry, this is my last time, please forgive me, take me back. So you have to just cut it off completely. And then in order to heal from it, I think you have to acknowledge what happened. You have to be willing to look at kind of the red flags, the things that your gut instinct ignored. And then you have to really kind of, I think, align yourself with healthy relationships, whether that be friendships, family, in order to heal and to learn, this is what I deserve. I deserve a relationship that is uplifting and positive rather than one that is continually beating me down.
I also think too, you have to realize is that relationships are, you deal with the physical, but there's in the physical what happened from the abuse standpoint. But then when, if you're in that relationship and there are sexual boundaries that are crossed, that's why it makes it even harder. That is why, when you actually read the Bible and it says that when people get married, that's why, sex is meant in the context of marriage and all this between a man and a woman, that the idea, because it's such an exposed thing that really are called to meld really our souls together. So when there is those moments, it is, and you feel, even though it's awful to be in this situation and trying to pull apart, it's like taking two pieces of Play-Doh, putting them together and tearing two pieces of Play-Doh apart. You still see pieces of the other person. And so it's really hard in that. So understanding sometimes why that actually happens, because there's also there's a spiritual, there's a physical connection that's there. I always tell people in those moments, it's really important that you have friends around you who you really can be accountable to. And also in those moments, being willing to be very honest and transparent with them. Being willing to say, hey, if I need to go stay at their house, practically go stay at their house. We've had situations, me and my wife, for people who were being abused. And we just said, hey, you can sleep. And they literally would sleep in our home for almost 2 or 3 weeks because they did not trust themselves to actually go back. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to get out. You have to do whatever it takes and not to be ashamed of that. And so, yeah.
Can I add one thing? As an adult, if you're in an abusive relationship, I can't do anything. If you have kids, I'm calling DCF. And you're having police come to your house, and you're possibly losing your children. So things to think about is that it's not just you. But if you continue this, it's going to involve a lot of other people, including me and the police.
I have a follow-up question for you, Lindsay, actually. So what if...
Skip right over.
What if somebody in this room is at kind of in that idea of control? They have a extremely limited lack of control in the situation. So say they depend on the person in the abusive relationship for housing or for financial support or something like that. What advice would you give them? I know Pastor Adrian just kind of touched on it about being willing to do everything, but what would you kind of practically give somebody of how to break out of that abusive relationship?
Yeah. There is support and help around Tallahassee. So there's women's shelters that are in an undisclosed location, so people cannot find you. They don't know where the housing is. There's a lot of different resources around town that can be helpful. And so I think you would just need to talk to a social worker or a professional that can help you kind of figure out, because I've had to deal with this, of a spouse that doesn't work and has kids. And so, yeah, there are resources, and it's definitely difficult, absolutely, but there are ways that you can find help.
Fun fact, if you don't know where the shelters are and you don't know where to go, start at the ER. That works too. Okay, so in this process of healing and going to therapy, what is a good realistic estimate for how long someone should be in therapy until if it's not helpful, does it ever become not helpful? How long does the healing process go on for? Like, does it ever actually get better? All those things. He already said we're starting with you, moving down the line.
What do you think? No, I do have conversations with people of like, I think we're good. I don't think you need to see me anymore. So yes, it does get better. It can get better. It doesn't mean that sometimes I have clients that I haven't seen for months who call me and are like, can I come back in for one session? Just, recheck in. So I think it definitely depends on the client as well as me, because sometimes your issues may not be fully resolved, but you know how to live with them and you know how to deal with the pain, and then you have the resources like friends that you can continue your healing process with that you don't necessarily need a therapist for.
Yeah, I think that it's, I never forget hearing, Doc Zoda talk about how, kind of like your emotional healing and emotional wellness is like almost 2 or 3 times what it would take for physical. You know what I mean? So depending on how bad it is, it's going to be 3 times as hard and take as long to actually go through that process, because, you don't, when you work out just like that, you'll start to see gains. Honestly, like Lindsay was saying, when you start working out, you instantly, if you haven't worked out in a long time, you'll start to see gains quick. When you start working on your soul, what you start realizing is like it gets bad. Like, it gets really bad. Like, you know what I mean? You're like, seriously, let me just say this. It's the monsters in the closet, right? It's literally you stuff everything in the closet, and you've learned to function with the monster in the closet. Then you open the door, the monster comes out, and you're like, yo, I've been so used. We've been good. You've been kept your crazy butt in here. I know how to deal with you, da-da-da. But what I tell people, at some point in time, the monster's going to come out of the closet. So you deal with it now, or you deal with it when you get married. You deal with it when you have children. That's the whole point of why you have to start doing the work now. But it takes a long time to do it, and you actually have to stay with it. It'll feel like you're not getting better. Let me also tell you this point about when it comes to mental health. It's sometimes the illusion is that you will never have those feelings anymore. Like, I won't have those feelings anymore. Like, when it comes to working through my process, so for me, it was all about feeling like I was like, growing up, not seen, things like that. And so that's how, so when I interact with my wife and I feel like something she says makes me feel that way, it used to maybe take me 3 weeks or whatever, to really get over it. Now it may take me 3 minutes. It doesn't mean I still don't feel that way. It's just my process of getting over it is way faster. And that's one of the biggest things that I actually had to learn, because I would start getting so frustrated and pissed off, because I was like, why am I still thinking about this? Why am I still sad? Why am I still whatever? And it was like, and I'll never forget talking to Doc. Doc's like, whoever said that you're not going to get that anymore?
That's good.
And I was like, oh yeah, no one ever said that. It's just, but he's like, but now, how quick are you getting over things? I'm like, way faster. He's like, okay, that means you're getting healthy. And so I think it's having proper expectation in your process, especially if you have really bad trauma stuff. Like, it's like peeling an onion. It's just like one layer, and then you're getting better. You know what happens, and then you don't realize something's there, and it's like literally like lifting up something. You're like, oh, I did not realize I was there, and that's a whole other thing. And so it's just the process, and I think that but I do think, let me say this, I do think within the first 3 to 6 months, you should see some level of some type of movement. If not, your therapist sucks, and go get a new one. Okay, so.
No pressure, though.
No pressure at all. No, but I'm being honest. There are a lot of therapists who suck. They just do. Like, I mean, it just really is. Sorry. You're not you, because we know that. But anyway, I'm not going to say why, but but anyway. You got anything, Trey?
I mean, you pretty much covered it on that one. But no, I mean, I will say, to go off another Zodaism, is that one of the unfortunate side effects of going down this journey is a greater awareness of the pain of life, which is just another way of saying that as you get more self-aware, as you start to feel more, you realize how messed up this world is to begin with, and how often you're not going to feel normal, or healthy, or whatever we're doing to throw on top of it. You're going to be pissed off, you're going to be sad, you're going to be working through something, and everything in some roundabout way is going to remind you of the stuff that you're working through. And so it's just continuing to push forward. And like I was saying earlier, like, there is a toughness that's developed by not quitting and just continuing to work through that.
That's one of the things that your dad always used to tell me, because he was like, I realized being in there, I had no idea what EQ was. It didn't become a popular thing until like the late 90s, early 2000s, about how people realized, if you have people who have a higher EQ are paid almost close to $100,000 more than someone who does, whatever their counterparts. But the one thing he told me when I walked in, and as we kept working through, he's like, he's worked with all these different people. He's like, you have one of the highest EQs I've been around. And here's what he said: the higher you grow, the more painful it will be. And it was the most discouraging, like encouraging. He's like, oh man, I got this thing. And then I was like, but it was awful. And it's been true. The more and more I get healthy, the more painful it actually is. Because I actually am way more aware of what really drives it. I'm way more aware when I sit and talk to people, what's driving their pain. I'm way more aware what's hard to me. I can look at someone and realize that you will never really understand the depth of what's really driving you. And that's super painful to watch that. And so again, but I will tell you, I would want it no other way, because in the end, I would not be here. I literally would not be alive if I didn't. I can honestly tell you that I would have literally put a gun in my mouth and blew my brains out if I did not get healthy. That's very dark.
Mm-hmm. I'm like, man, should I just do a follow-up question off that? Or?
Yeah, I know. Welcome to Mondays.
Right. So glad you're here. All right, I'm trying to see if we've got a related question from that. So I guess, and you could, Pastor Adrian, probably also speak to your personal experience in this. For people who are walking through depression and grief, specifically friends of people who are walking through depression and grief, how do we love them well? How do we stay out of judgment? how do we not question their faith, their spirituality, relationship with Jesus in the process?
I think that I think when you're walking alongside somebody, you have to be very spirit-led in those moments. Because sometimes your friend doesn't need, like this what happens. Most time our anxiety wants to try to figure it out and help them, and you can't help them. You just can't. Sometimes you just need to be there. Just listen to them. And in a very Western-driven culture where we always have to solve problems, you're not going to solve that problem. You're not Superman, or Wonder Woman. You're not going to fix them. And sometimes it's just you sitting there. But there also comes a point in time where you may have to, if you're very close, there's tough love. One of the most pivotal things for me was through my process, my wife looking at me, and it was a moment where I was kind of in a dark place, and she looked at me, and she's like, listen, I'm no longer going to try to save you. I can't save you. She was like, if you decide to do that, you decide to do that. We will mourn. It will be awful, and it'll be hard for whatever. She wants this thing, but I'm no longer going to try to do that because I can't. And in that moment, it was actually, and I was in a very dark place at that time, but it actually was the thing I needed to hear in that moment.
It's so good.
It's what I need to hear. And let me also say this. If you're actually walking through depression, especially if you're a Jesus follower, I used to always struggle because I used to be like, man, you would hear people, man, the love of God and all these things that would go. And I'm like, dude, none of that kept me alive. Literally, I just had and I'll never forget, one of my mentors said, I was like, man, I want it to be because of Jesus and what he did for me. I was like, but right now, the only thing that's keeping me alive is my wife and my children. And he was like, that's fine. If that's what you got to hold on to right now, you hold on to it as much. And I'm just going to be honest with some of you. Like, if that's all you have to hold on to, you hold on to that. Because I can honestly tell you now, after walking through it, it is the fact of one of the things that, even though I still battle, is the fact of what actually Jesus did for me and what Jesus has called me to do on this earth that I want to finish and complete. And when my time is over, then let him be the one who is the author to end that and not me because of what he's doing. Now, I finally have gotten there, but for a long time, it was just me holding on to the fact that I could not envision my children growing up with me not being there or my wife being left to have to deal with that. And that's what kept me alive. And so I want to encourage anybody out there, if that's the case, that sometimes you just have to find just one thing to hold on to and let that be the thing.
That's great. Lindsay or Trey, any other thoughts?
I currently have a client whose cat is the only thing keeping her alive, and I'll take it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Let's all pray that cat doesn't escape.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the thing. If it's
that's so awesome.
We can erase that from the podcast.
That's great.
So I would say, too, getting back to the original question of, I think there's a difference between grief and depression.
Right.
And knowing the difference of that is going to be very different of how you approach that person and how you help that person.
That's great. Could you touch on differences real quick?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Follow. Clarity.
Okay, so grief, I mean, it's grief. We all know what grief is. Depression looks very different. So depression is I can't get out of bed. Depression is I get out of bed and I go to work, but I feel miserable all the time. Or it's I can't even shower, and my animal is the only thing keeping me alive. So I would say depression looks very different, and knowing when you need to send that person to therapy is going to be key, because I think like Adrian said, be there for them, listen to them, don't judge them for what they're going through, but also know your limits. Because I think too many of us try and be the friend therapist and can actually prolong the healing process because we don't know what to do with it. So we just kind of listen and deal with it, but then that person's actually not getting better.
Wow.
I'll touch on grieving. I think grieving is important to understand. I mean, from a friend standpoint, but then also from just a standpoint of somebody walking through grief and knowing what to expect, right? So grief is one of the things that's been studied, like as far as mental health goes, one of the things that's just been studied over and over and over again. So much so that like it is a process that they have identified, right? Denial, bargaining, pain, anger, ultimately acceptance. And so if you're a friend walking through that with somebody, understanding that if they are truly grieving, it's going to present differently depending on kind of where they're at in that process. And it doesn't necessarily mean it goes one direction. Like, they may move throughout that. Another way to think about too, right, is times that you're grieving. Like, if you're really working to forgive somebody who's hurt you, it's going to present a lot that same way of having to work through that grieving process. Again, going through those steps and just being prepared for that, I think will help to avoid a lot of missed expectations, right? So if you know what to expect, then it'll make the process more bearable.
That's good. If Trey, I know you do a really good job at explaining this, and then if anyone else would like to add, in doing these things alongside of people, we've heard Dr. Zoda, we've heard Trey teach on this process of being yourself, being together, right? Staying as a differentiated human being while you're doing things alongside of people, not being codependent. Can you briefly explain that so people know a little bit how to stay themselves without being codependent alongside people?
Practice. You know, I think some of it is trying to maintain an awareness of what's going on with you. That's first and foremost got to be the most important, because if you're so anxious about what's going on with the other person that it's affecting your behavior, then ultimately at the end of the day, that's what codependence is. It's placing a higher importance on their reaction. And so I would say it's keeping that barrier and keeping an awareness of, okay, when am I slipping into caring too much about what's going on, or when do I feel like my anxiety is shutting us down? You know, one of the things that we say here at Engage, one of our values is authenticity, right? So it's self-awareness and the resilience to remain self-aware. And one of the things that shuts you down the fastest is anxiety. And so if you're ultimately anxious about something else that another person is feeling, then you're losing the ability to be authentic in that place.
I want to say this with that. So let's now deal with this in like what he just said, why this matters. It almost matters in every part of your life. If you actually want to be someone, whether if you are working in corporate America, you're going to work for it, whatever you're going to do, the idea of being what Edward Freeman calls a self-differentiated leader is the ball game. Because we live in anxiety. We live in systems that are made from anxiety. Because we live in systems that are made from anxiety, no matter where you walk in, no matter what you do, whether it's on a university campus, if it is working in a C-suite of a corporation, whatever, in your own home, we have anxiety-filled systems. And the ability to be able to love and care for people, but also not fall into their anxiety, separates you. The idea of being able to mentally, emotionally walk through the things that you go through actually unlocks creativity. Because anxiety gets so high, you can't even solve problems. Because you're just like, and you're like, well, I just want to do this to make this person happy versus what is the actual right thing. That is the problem right now in all the conversations we're having in politics and everything in our country today is because we have a bunch of people, we have anxiety-filled systems, and a bunch of people who just keep pushing more anxiety. And the policies they create more anxiety, except for when you actually inject someone who's like, man, and it's weird when you see somebody who's like, you know what, I can agree. Like, I love listening to somebody say, I can agree with that person, even though on the other side of the aisle. And so I want to encourage you, like some of you in this room, your mental health is not just about you just being happy, but it's actually about you making an impact, like in this life. It's all going to come down to the fact, can you actually learn how to do that? Can you learn how to be with people and actually be together?
Next question. Can you be spiritually healthy without being emotionally healthy?
No.
Next.
No.
That's it.
No. I mean, listen, it's Peter Scazzaro. Spiritual health and emotional health are inseparable. Because you're made up of body, soul, and spirit. But what you have to understand, many times in the Christian church, what we've dealt with is the fact of the physical body. We deal with those things. Don't look at this. Don't do this. Don't go. And Jesus come to sanctify this. But here's also, he came to sanctify your emotions as well. Right. Please remember the first murder that happened in the Bible happened because Cain felt some type of way. It said that Cain was dejected and depressed. And God shows up to Cain and actually, as a good counselor, he asks him, Cain, why are you? He doesn't tell Cain, hey, you suck for being this way. Suck it up, get over it, believe the gospel, whatever. He doesn't. He literally says, why are you depressed? Because he was actually teaching him in that moment where he dig in to find out what was motivating him. And so the reality is that most of the stuff and behaviors we do, and a lot of times our connections in Jesus and relationships, is because we're actually not emotionally healthy. Think about this, everybody in this room. Almost all bad decisions you've made in your life started because you felt some type of way. It is. Everything. Everything you've done. There's not a thing you've done because you didn't feel some type of way. All of a sudden, oh, man, like you saw something on Twitter or Instagram that was towards you, and then all of a sudden you start you start adding this whole subtweet of everything in the world, saying all the craziest stuff in the world, DMing people, putting all their DMs out there, and then you regret the whole thing. Why? Because you felt some type of way. And so if you don't learn to deal with that, you're going to make a bunch of bad choices. Let me tell you this. At one point in time, I'll give you an example why emotions matter. Guys, I lost $50,000 because I felt some type of way. $50,000 because I felt some type of way. Here's what I did. I actually, because of my lack of security, I wanted to be in a certain circle. So I was like, if I do this, I can go, and I won't get into all the details of it, but I just started like, man, I'm going to hustle my way and to get this deal done. And I did it, and God just let me do it. And listen, and you know what happens? I'll never forget, I was doing my taxes, and I started going, I'm like, I spent this much, what is wrong? And the deal never got done. Oh. Here's what made me really frustrated with God. Like a month later, the deal I was trying to get done, somebody who actually sat in our athletic Bible study we used to do, worked for Nike, and I was like, and called me and said, hey, I really feel like I need to help you with this. The thing I spent $50,000 for came in one phone call. Point being is this, you can lose a ton of money because you feel some type of way. So. Dude, yeah, that's the thing. I got to go home. My wife's like, really? Word? That's how you...
Yeah.
No, I was just to go off that point too, right? So like Pastor Adrian's talking about chapter 3, right? So like sin enters, what happens? Immediately Adam and Eve feel shame. So what do? They hide. And if you're not willing to tell God how you feel and work through that shame, you're going to hide from him. So again, it's just inseparable. You can't be spiritually healthy without being mentally healthy.
It's really good.
Shame is really bad, by the way. Really bad. I have a quote for shame, but I won't say it. But go ahead. Well, no, shame. It's emotional. Like it's an emotional STD, right? Like it really is. It's like emotional herpes. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So you know what? As soon as you hear that, what happens? You're like, ooh, hurt. Like no, you know what I'm saying? You're like, ooh, yes. So you think of shame? Like no, I don't want that. And it just keeps on going because it's just this pit that you can never get out of. Mm-hmm. So you're gonna start using that now, aren't you?
No.
You won't.
No. I talk about shame, but not in the herpes form, so we're
good. Next question. Okay, so this one is basically we're going to talk about ambivalence, two conflicting thoughts or emotions. How do you handle or approach ambivalence in general when you have certain feelings about one situation and you feel like that's where you could go and it might be the right thing, but you also have a little bit tension moving forward with it. So essentially, ambivalence, contrasting thoughts. It could be good, it could be bad. I feel both at the same time. How do I make a decision or move forward?
Does the Bible say something about one of those things? That's what you should do. If there's not a clear answer, then you could ask somebody that you trust. That's always a good thing to do. You know, like I sit with my dad all the time. Hey, I'm feeling ambivalent about this. And very clearly he'll say, you're stupid. Do this one over here. And sometimes that's what you need is just good counsel to tell you which one to do. Another thing is, again, looking at yourself. How anxious are you as you're thinking about this thought, right? Like, is it causing you to spin up? Is there a way that you can zoom out from that and critically think through both of these? Play out what's going to happen. Try to get as futuristic with it as possible. What's the best thing? But, I don't know, 3 practicals. Taught to my dad.
I'll give y'all Adrian's personal cell phone number. If you are in ambivalence, you can just talk to him. He'll tell you have emotional
I don't know if
herpes.
you want
It's
to
fine.
call me. Don't call me the
He'll
most.
give you a straight answer, though.
I will definitely give you a straight answer. No. Yeah. I mean.
Okay. All right. So next question is, how do we respond when intrusive thoughts occur? And a sub-question could also be, how do we distinguish an intrusive thought and then also practice hearing God's voice alongside? Because sometimes the lines feel like they get crossed.
Well, intrusive thoughts. Gosh, well, I think it depends on the nature of the intrusive thoughts. Part of like OCD is intrusive thoughts, right? The obsessions that lead to the compulsions. I would say just when you notice it's an intrusive thought, label it and don't feed it. One of the things I have my clients do is ask themselves 2 questions. So is this true? And is this helpful? Because a lot of times our intrusive thoughts feel accurate. But if you answer, is this true, and it's not, then don't dwell on it. If it's true, yes. But if it's not helpful, then don't dwell on it. If it's true and helpful, then you need to work on it. You need to think about it, fix it, whatever, plan it. But most of the time, our anxieties and our intrusive thoughts are neither true nor are they helpful.
Really great. Really great.
Pull this up because I want to see this. One of the things I would encourage you, we start talking about intrusive thoughts, truth, lies, whatever. Again, a lot of our next semester here at TBD, we're going to actually be talking about the idea of truth and lies. A lot of this is motivated as a book that just came out called Live No Lie by John Mark Comer. And actually, this is a thing that's talked a lot. There's one thing he talks about, there's an old monk, and it was literally, they used to have as a monastic handbook for combating demons, was literally something they had. And the whole point was like what you just said, what's the lie? Understand why is a lie, what is it creating, and then what's the truth? I actually have something that I have right now. Many times in your life, you have, I'm going to get this idea a little bit about lies, that sometimes we all have lies that are spoken and communicated to us in life. And what I want you to know is, how do you actually combat that? Mm-hmm. Or do you just let those things feed into you? Because if you're a follower of Jesus, this is the idea, you have those lies, but then also you have to combat that with actual truth. And so many times, okay, what does actually the Word of God say that combats that? And do you actually confess that and quote that and consistently do it? Because you're getting bombarded all the time. There's a constant bombardment that's going to come towards you that speak to life messages for you. And there's constant, you have to constantly remind yourself. That is why Jesus was not a moron. That is why when the devil shows up and he fights against him, he actually quotes the Word of God. He was literally giving us the plan of how we deal with that. Because when the devil didn't jump into his body, the devil didn't fight him. He just sowed lies and he combated it with truth. Most of the battle of your walk with Jesus is in your mind. Mm-hmm. It's in your mind. And what we tend to do is just always think it's other things. It's literally in your mind. And those are the things that actually happen. And so I think it's really important that you actually understand every day you wake up, do you have a battle plan for winning the war? Because whatever rests in your brain is what you will become. And most of us believe lies that were sold, that we have through our own actions, through things told to us. We just believe them, and then we become Jesus followers, and we're wondering, this Jesus thing don't work. The Jesus things work, but it's what Paul writes. You have do not conform anymore to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The battle for actually, and I've learned this over 20-some years of maturity in Jesus, is actually, can you replace lies with truth? So,
really good. Anything to add?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay. So, sort of on similar lines, would be considering the future and possible outcomes without letting that overwhelm you in the present. How do you consider the future and or possible outcomes without letting you overwhelm you in the present?
Let's do this. Okay, I'll start. I think I preached about it yesterday. It's Matthew 6. Don't worry about tomorrow, for today has enough worries of itself. But here's the thing, I'm futuristic. Like, one of the things is Lindsay's husband, Ben, and I, he's a good friend of mine. When we get together, me and Ben, that's all we do is talk about the future, right? And it can become like incredibly because there's all these things you think about. But what I've come to realize, it's okay to think about the future. But what I think about the future is I think about now. is that God, who created the heavens and the earth, understands the future, and what he has in the future to do, we will not miss that. And so that's what you rest in. But it's okay to think about that. I mean, I'm a parent. Let me tell you this. I'm constantly freaked out and thinking about the future of my children. What about this? What about this decision? What about this? But what I have come to realize is that Jesus loves my kids way more than I do. I've come to realize Jesus loves he has more concern about my future than I do. And I think that's where the rest comes, but that's where the faith comes in that process, with not letting your anxiety, because here's what happens. I will give you this. Most of the times how you think it's going to play out will never play out that way. Ever. Serving Jesus for 23 years is never. The results have been it's going to be what it's going to happen this way. And it has never, ever, ever happened this way. And so I want to encourage you, don't get fixated on what you think it's going to look like or how you get there by being able to do that. So, you know, Trey, Lindsay, anything? Am I going to be the talking head now?
No, I think one of the things, just to talk from personal experience, right? So I was in the military, did that for 5 years, got out. And so now looking around at all my friends, they're graduating undergrad and like starting grad school. And I'm a freshman walking around 23 years old. I'm like, what the heck am I supposed to do? So I've lived like years just constantly evaluating where I wasn't and just thinking about that, always feeling so behind. And because I was so fixated on that, I wasn't doing anything for my development, like real time, present day, thinking about that. I was only focused on, I have to do this to get to this point, or to make this much money, or to wind up at this place. I need to be doing these things. And so I would continue to spin myself up about it without, in that process working on, hey, am I going to build trust and faith that God is going to carry out the plans that he has for me? Or am I going to be working on any kind of personal development or anything in the present that could help me accomplish those things? Or am I just going to be obsessed with this idea of I'm not there yet, right? So then instead of looking and evaluating anything going on with me, I was only looking at other people and seeing that I didn't have what they had. And, comparison is the thief of joy. So you will just remain unsatisfied if you keep being fixated on other people and where you're not.
Peer pressure, I gotta go. Well, I think too, a lot of people escape reality or our present by either focusing on the past, dreaming about the future, or living in like a fantasy world. Like, what if I had never moved to Florida and gone on the blind date where I met my husband type thing? Love you. So I think
I'm still questioning that decision making though.
Mine or his?
Your decision making. Definitely your decision making.
When we are dissatisfied with where we are in life, we tend to live in one of the three. So I would say when you start to focus on the future, is it because you don't want to be where you're at in the present?
Wow. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. That was great.
That's it. I'll leave it there.
Mic drop. All right. So unless I get another text message in the next couple minutes, we'll end on an upper. What is the difference between joy and happiness?
Have you seen Marie Kondo on Netflix?
I haven't, so yeah.
It's all about organization. That is joy, and then happiness is anything else. But no, I think joy is ultimately, if you think about it, it's a spiritual gift, right? On top of it being a feeling that we would equate to happiness. But I think joy is having a satisfaction and a sense of purpose, even whenever it doesn't feel like things are going right. So that maybe, hey, I see that there are hard times around me, right? Like, so maybe I got in a fight with my wife, and maybe work didn't go so well today, and there's all this, but at the same time, I have this sense of satisfaction that, hey, at the same time, I'm accomplishing what God has called me to. And yeah, I had this conflict with my wife, but marriage is good, versus, hey, went out, had a great date night. I feel really happy afterwards. This is probably a terrible explanation. I'm going to pass it off to one of you guys go there. But I think but really the difference to me between happiness and joy is just that joy really does come from this sense of God's satisfaction, right? So like feeling that's what joy is, I would define it as, right? So going back to the marriage analogy, it is, hey, we did the right thing and we're working, we're trying to be a healthy couple. God has satisfaction that we are modeling that for other people.
I actually think one of the ways that joy, I think you can see it manifest, is that even in the midst of situations that suck, you still have hope. Like, I've been through a lot of things in my life, and one of the things I can look back on is that being in really tough spots, but having this like crazy sense of hope, even if it didn't play out. Great example. When my mom passed away, like, it was this weird thing because, and it's like I felt wrong for it because I was like, I know people are gonna look at me in a strange way, but like when my mom passed away, there was honestly a joy that was there, and here's what I mean. I was deeply sad, but I knew my mom was a follower of Jesus. My mom dealt with chronic illness her whole life. And I believe the scripture, this idea that she is now fully complete in the presence of God. And there was a joy there. So I found myself in the midst of sometimes being really sad. To some moments, I would find myself even in the midst of it smiling. Because just imagining my mom not having to walk through the chronic pain she was walking through, there was joy. And I think that's what makes a difference as a Jesus follower. It doesn't mean, because many times we think we live in this disconnected world as followers of Jesus that we actually think we have to put on this show. That's always like, I gotta be happy. No, like, things suck. You can feel pain. It's okay. But the difference is that no matter what I'm feeling, I believe there's hope. I believe there's something, there's redemption, even if it does not go the way I think it should go. I know all things work out for those who love him and called according to his purpose. And so in the midst of my son being on the spectrum and him not talking through, he was 4, even at times in that, I had no idea if he would ever talk. But I would find myself having joy because regardless, if God had given us him, there was a reason why. You know, Wendy would tell me this at times, you know, for my wife, who's very career driven, she would find joy because she did this. She shut down her life for about 2.5 years because they told us, for him to get ahead in life, you're going to have to spend about 30 or 40 hours a week working with him. So as a very career-driven individual, she shut everything down in her life in order to get on the floor to play with the hope that he would. And I tell my son all the time that, you know, whenever he's being a jerk to his mom, I'm like, listen, homeboy, you would not be talking as much. Matter of fact, I wish he wouldn't have played as much because you talk too much. But I do say, like, but Wendy says she would find joy at times. She's there as a super talented person playing on the floor with these toys, hoping one day. But actually she found it, and I think that's where there was always this hope that was there.
Anything to add? No. Okay. All right, guys. We are right at time, so I'm going to end this there. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your questions. There are a few we did not get to, so shameless plug, if you would like to hear answers to the questions we did not get to, make sure you subscribe to Street Theology, our podcast, available on all podcast platforms, and this will also be dropped on there shortly, so we're excited for you guys to hear it. So with that being said, if y'all will give a round to our panelists. They did a great job.